Hello everyone, I hope all of you are doing good. I am Roshni from LearnoHub, the free learning platform where you can learn physics, chemistry, maths, biology absolutely for free at learnohub.com. So today I am here with a video on heredity and evolution, class 10th science, and trust me, this is a super duper interesting video. This is a super duper important lesson which you must understand. Now what is it that we are going to learn in heredity? Now, we all have noticed that we look very similar to our parents or grandparents. Similarly, our children look very similar to us or our parents. Now, what is this? How is it that the traits or the features are getting passed on from one generation to other? This is exactly what we are going to learn in heredity. Now, what is it that we are going to study in evolution? Now, when we talk of evolution, we are not just talking about me or us and our parents. We are talking about we as all the human beings, all the Homo sapiens. How did we originate? From where did we evolve? So, that story of evolution. So this is, once again, I am reiterating that this is going to be a very, very interesting video. In fact, do watch all the videos of this video series. So what are we waiting for? Let's get started.
So before we get in depth, let us first know what does this term heredity means. It is very simple. It is just that the passing of traits from parents or ancestors to the offspring. So what are traits? When I use the term traits, if in case you are not familiar with this word traits, the word traits means characteristics. For example, if we talk about us, if we talk about the human beings, so what are our characteristics? We have 2 hands, we have 5 fingers in each hand, we have 2 eyes, we have 2 ears. So each and everything that we have is our characteristic. Each and every way we behave, we can walk, we can jump, we can run. So each and everything that we actually possess is a characteristic which define us. Similarly, there are a set of characteristics which define any other organism, say which defines a lion. There are a set of characteristics which defines a plant, right? So each and every organism has some specific characteristics, and these characteristics are also known as traits. So what is heredity? It is passing of traits from parents or ancestors to the offspring. You would have often seen that there is a lot of similarity between you and your parents. Maybe be it your father or your mother. Maybe the way your father looks is very similar to the way your grandfather looked. So that similarity is passing on from one generation to the next generation, and this is known as heredity. So it is not only the features but also the basic body design and the structure resemble parents. As I told you just now, that the baby of an elephant looks very similar to an elephant. It doesn't happen that the baby which is born out of this elephant comes out to be a lion. That doesn't happen, right? So the basic structure of that organism definitely remains the same. On top of that, the small features are also very much similar to their parents. For example, you would have seen that maybe none of us look very similar to some unknown person, right? Even though we are all human beings, we all have the basic body design and the basic structure same. But our features, for example, our eyes, our nose, our hair, all those things do not resemble with any other. It resembles only with our parents or only with our close relatives, right? So in heredity, we are going to talk about why or how this similarity arises. So whether you talk of this elephant or a giraffe or a plant, for example, if you have a rose plant, so if a new plant comes out of that rose plant, that is definitely going to be another rose plant. It is not going to be a sunflower or a marigold, right? So the offspring bears a lot of similarity with its parents. So the same thing happens even in case of human beings. So here in this picture you can see that this couple has got two kids. Now one of the kids have got brown hair, which he has inherited from his mother, whereas the other kid has got black hair, which maybe he got from his father. So there are features which are very much similar with our parents in heredity. We are going to talk about that. Now, the branch of science which deals with the study of heredity is genetics. As I said, this is not going to be a small topic. There are a hell lot of things, or there are a hell lot of details that you can learn in this heredity. So that is why it has come up as a separate branch of science that is called genetics, and genetics is really interesting. So here you will just get to know only the basics of genetics. Now when you go to your higher classes, maybe in class 12, you will learn little more details on genetics, and you will see it yourself how interesting it is. So let us, with this basic introduction, let us see what it is. Now when I talk of heredity, I often talk of inheriting traits. Like I often talk of something which is passed on from your parents to you, something which is passed on from your grandparents to your parents, right? So the word inherited, this inheritance also comes with heredity. Now many people get confused that if both the terms mean the same, why do we at all have two different terms? Now let's have a look. Are they exactly the same, or there is some difference between the two? When I talk of heredity, I am talking about genetic transmission of traits from parents to offspring. That means the characteristics are being passed from parents to the offspring genetically. That means through the genes. I have given a small introduction on genes in the previous lesson, right? I told you where are the genes located in our body. Inside the, let me have a quick review. Inside the cell we have the nucleus, right? Inside the nucleus, what do we have? We have the chromosomes, and the chromosomes consist of genes, and those genes actually tell about our characteristics, right? So when I talk of heredity, I am talking about transmission of characteristics through genes. So it happens internally, right? But when I talk of inheritance is a broad term. It is the practice of passing on anything, be it property or title or rights or debts, from one generation to the next. I'll give you an example which will clarify the difference between two. When I'm talking about heredity, I am talking about passing on of only traits from parents to offspring. But when I talk of inheritance, it can be anything. It can be property. For example, if there is a family where there is a couple, they have got a kid. Now the kid grows and the couple becomes old. Now when the couple dies, what happens to the property of the couple? It belongs to his son. Now again the son gets married, he gives birth to another kid. Now again the son grows old and he dies. So what happens to the property? The same property goes to his son. So generation after generation, the property is passed on from one generation to another. Similarly, there are some families who get some special title because of any of their good contribution, right? Now once they get that title gets passed on from one generation to the other. So this practice of passing on, it can be anything. It can be characteristics, it can be property, it can be title, so it can be anything, right? So this is known as inheritance. So that means when I am talking about heredity, I am talking only about the inheritance of traits through genes. But when I am talking about inheritance, it is a broader term. It is about passing on of anything from one generation to the next. I hope that's clear. Next is heredity occurs through inheritance of genes, whereas biological inheritance is what is related to heredity. So that means under inheritance you have a couple of other things as well. It can be inheritance of property or title or rights or debts. So when I talk of biological inheritance, that means the traits which get transferred biologically through the genes from one generation to another, that is heredity. So this is the difference between these two terms, heredity and inheritance. So when I think of examples of heredity, like our height, our features, our resemblance, all these are examples of heredity which gets transferred from our parents to us through the genes. So let us look at some examples which reflect heredity. So as you can see here, the elephant, the fish, this teddy, the giraffe, human beings. So you see a wide variety. I mean, every living organism gives birth to the next generation, their young ones, and they have some resemblance with the previous generation. So this is about the sexual reproduction. So this is not only about sexual reproduction, it also happens in the lower animals who reproduce asexually, right? In our previous lesson, we talked about sexual and asexual reproduction in detail. So even in asexual reproduction, we saw that the new organisms which are formed, they are exactly identical to the parents, right? So even their heredity plays a role, because even the characteristics or the traits are getting transmitted from the one generation to the next generation. So whether we talk of amoeba, or we talk of yeast, or we talk of hydra, where we see asexual reproduction. So even there we see that heredity plays a very important role. So you can see, by looking at these examples, you can see that heredity, that is inheritance from previous generation, provides a common basic body design as well as certain changes in it. So now these small changes which are seen in the next generation, these changes are less in asexual reproduction, and the changes are more in sexual reproduction, right? In our previous lesson, we talked about variation, right? That means the new characters which are seen in the new organism or the next generation. Now, when you look at these asexual mode of reproduction, that is whether you look at this amoeba, or you look at the hydra, or you look at the yeast, in most of these cases, we see that the new individual which is formed, it is exactly identical to the parents. However, sometimes there are some small or some minor differences. But in case of sexual reproduction, where two parents are involved to give birth to the young ones, here you can see that very rarely it happens that the new organism is exactly similar to the parents. So they have got many new characteristics which are not present in either of the parents, right? So the changes are more in sexual reproduction as compared to asexual reproduction, right? But heredity exists in all life forms, whether they reproduce sexually or asexually. So let us now talk about the inherited traits. Just now I was telling heredity is nothing but passing of traits from parents to offspring. So what are those traits which are passed on from one generation to another generation? So let us look at some examples and try to understand what exactly are inherited traits. So as I said, inheritance from your parents will give you a basic body design, that is the kid of an elephant will be an elephant, the kid of a human will be a human, the kid of a plant will be a plant. But on top of that, it also gives subtle changes in it for the next generation, and these changes are more prominent for organisms which reproduce sexually than those organisms which reproduce asexually. What is an inherited trait? It is a trait that is genetically passed down from one generation to another. As I said, certain characteristics which are passed from parents to the offsprings through the genes. So the transfer takes place through genes. So let us look at some examples which define inherited traits, which will give you more idea about what are inherited traits. Look at this example. So here you can see that the man with the black hair and a woman with a brown hair, they got married. So they reproduced and they gave birth to two kids. Now here if you see, one of their kids have got black hair, which he inherited from his father. So the black hair is an inherited trait. Similarly, the other kid who has got brown hair, he inherited the same from his mother. So the brown hair is also an inherited trait. So the hair color is an inherited trait or an inherited characteristic. Similarly, the kind of hair they have. For example, you can see that the kid with black hair, this kid has got straight hairs, right? And the mother has got straight hair, but the father has got curly hair. So this kid has got the type of his hair or the kind of hair, whether it is straight or curly, that he has inherited from his mother. Similarly, there are some other examples also which are inherited from parents. Maybe our height, our complexion. These are also different traits which get inherited from parents. Let us look at some of the examples like hair color. You would have seen that people have many different hair colors. Some have black hair, some are blonde, some have brown hairs, some have curly hairs, some of them have extremely straight hairs, some have wavy hair. So there are many different types of hair and there are many different colors of hair. So hair color is an example of inherited trait. Eye color is another example. People might have a blue eye, people might have a black eye, people might have a brown eye. So there are different eye colors, and eye color is again an inherited trait which the offspring gets it from their previous generation. Height, shape of the feet. You will see that different people have different shapes of feet. It is not exactly identical with everybody. And the shape of the feet also, sometimes if you observe very closely, when a small child is born in maybe in your family or in your neighborhood, if you try to just see the features of the child and try to compare it with their parents, sometimes you will see that some features exactly tally with the parents. It looks as if a small copy of the parents' feet is what you are seeing. So some of the features becomes very evident even from childhood. Earlobes, it is a very common inherited trait. Now in earlobes, we have two types of earlobes. One is free and the other one is attached. So here in this picture you can see this is a free earlobe. So here this earlobe is free. But here you can see that it is attached with the skin. So this is called an attached earlobe and this is called a free earlobe. So these are some of the examples of inherited traits which children inherit from their parents. Now the most important question. How do the traits get inherited? Till now we were only talking about what is heredity, what are inherited traits. I think many of us would have had some idea about whatever we have talked so far. Now the most important question comes, how are these traits passing on from one generation to another? How is this actually happening? That is the most important question. So for this, a major contribution was given by Gregor Mendel. So Gregor Mendel is the name who gave the major contribution in the field of genetics, and that is why he is known as the father of genetics. Now, it is very interesting to know that he actually studied mathematics as well as science, and he always wanted to be a teacher. But his aspiration to become a teacher was a failure. That's because he could not clear the exam which was needed for the teaching certificate. With that failure, what did he do? He did something really interesting. He came back and he started growing pea plant in his monastery. Now, he not only grew the peas, he also started studying inheritance with the help of those pea plants. So, he started studying inheritance in peas. Now, there were many scientists before Mendel who studied inheritance with peas. But the exceptional thing which Mendel did was that since he had also studied mathematics, so he tried to combine mathematics with inheritance. That is, he started keeping count of individuals exhibiting a particular trait in each generation. That means he grew a lot of peas. Now, he started doing mix and match with the peas. So he made the peas to crossbreed with each other, and then the new pea plant which was formed, he started keeping count that how many pea plant resembled their parents, how many pea plants had new characters, how many pea plants had some other character. So he not only started keeping record of what kind of characters the new plants showed, he also started keeping account of how many pea plants showed what type of characters. So mathematics and science together blended, and Mendel could discover a lot of new things, and that is why he became the father of genetics. So now we will talk about the Mendel's experiment, that what he actually did. Now we all know that in sexual reproduction there are two parents involved, and both of these parents contribute equally to the traits which are seen in the child. Both parents will contribute. For example, in human beings, the father and the mother both will contribute something to the child. That is why the child will have some features similar to his father, some features similar to his mother. Right? Now, Mendel, with his experiment with the pea plants, found out the principles based on which it can be guessed how characters will be inherited or passed from parents to offspring. So he performed a couple of experiments with those peas, and he arrived at certain principles which became the principles of inheritance, and based on those principles the phenomenon of inheritance happens not only in peas but also in human beings, in all living organisms. Right? So now let us see what he actually did. So he took he first of all chose different characters of both parents. Right? So he took one pea plant which was tall. So which character did he choose? He chose height. So he took one plant with tall height. He took another plant which was dwarf, that is, which was very short in height. So height was a characteristic which was chosen by Mendel. So height was the contrasting characteristics which was chosen by Mendel. So he took two plants of two different heights and then he cross-pollinated. What is cross-pollination? In our previous lesson, I have spoken about pollination, right? So how reproduction happens in plants? The first step is pollination, right? So the pollen grains are the male sex cells for plants. So the pollen grains will have to be transferred to the ovary where the female sex cell or the egg cell lies. So cross pollination means the pollen grain will be transferred from one plant to the other plant. So what he did, pollen grain of one plant was transferred to the flower of the other plant. So the pollen grains was dusted over the stigma of the dwarf plant. For example, from here the pollen grains were taken. Where are pollen grains located? They are present inside the flower. Where inside the flower? Inside the anther, right? So these pollen grains were taken and they were dusted over the flowers of this plant. So on the stigma. You remember all this we discussed in our previous lesson. So the pollen grains, once they reach the stigma, they will be able to reach the ovary through the style. Right? So that is how cross-pollination was done. Now what was the result of this cross-pollination? So he cross-pollinated tall pea plants with dwarf pea plants. So the plants with bigger height were called tall. The plants with extremely small height were known as dwarf. And the result was that he saw that all the plants were tall. So he was quite surprised. So when we feel that both parents contribute, that is our assumption. Now that is our assumption. At that time he was thinking, when there are two parents involved in the process of reproduction, why is it that on cross-pollinating them, all the kids resemble one parent? That means all of them were tall. At least some of them should have been short. But that is not the case. So all the plants were tall. So now this was known as the first generation, right? So this was the first filial generation, that is F1 generation. That is the term which is used in genetics. F1. What is F1? It means first filial generation. What is the term filial? Filial denotes offspring. Filial means offspring, that is child. So that is why the first child generation, because this is the first time these plants were cross-pollinated and they gave birth through children. So this was the first filial generation. Now what did he do next? He took one of these plants. So one of these plants from the F1 generation, he took one of them and then self-pollinated this plant. That means the pollen grain of the same plant, it was pollinated with itself. So that is self-pollination. That means pollen grain of this flower was passed to the ovary of this flower only. So the plant was self-pollinated and then it was found that out of 4, 3 were tall but 1 was short. Now here this 4 and 3 are not the exact number of plants. It is talking about the ratio. For example, when he would have actually counted the numbers, maybe the numbers would have come something like say out of the 100 plants which were produced, out of those 100 plants, maybe 20 of them were dwarf and the remaining 80 were all tall, right? So he is just talking about the ratio. So he saw that 1/4 of the plants were dwarf. So now he was all the more surprised, because now in this case, if you look here, there is no dwarf plant involved, right? So this basic experiment led him to think a lot over this, that why is it, and this generation which is now created is known as the F2 generation, that is the second filial generation, so the second generation of offsprings. Right? So in the first generation, that is the F1 generation, you saw that only one trait was displayed, one trait of the two parents was displayed. Whereas when any one of the plant of the F1 generation was self-pollinated, it was seen that 1/4 of the F2 generation showed characteristics which was not at all displayed in F1 generation. So this characteristic, I mean, after this F1 generation was formed, it appeared as if this characteristic has already vanished. That means the dwarf property of tree plants is gone, it is vanished. But again in the F2 generation, the same characteristic comes up. So this was a big surprise for Mendel. Now with the help of this experiment, now we will see that how Mendel derived the principles of inheritance. So what was his conclusion from this experiment? His conclusion was that the F1 generation, that is the first filial generation, gave all tall plants, but the second filial generation gave 75% tall plants and 25% short plants. That's because total, 3/4 of the plants were tall and 1/4 of the plants were short, right? So from this, Mendel got this idea that the dwarf characteristic did not vanish. Even though in the F1 generation it was not seen, but it did not vanish. It was also carried and it also remained hidden somewhere in the plants. So it was also there, but it did not get expressed. Now why it did not get expressed and how it was expressed in the F2 generation, all those things we will come later. But looking at the results of this experiment, all that Mendel understood was that the dwarf characteristic is not vanished. It is also carried somewhere and it is also hidden somewhere in the F1 generation. And that is why it got expressed in the F2 generation. Right? So, based on this experiment, we will see how Mendel described so many other things. So from this, what was his conclusion? 2 copies of a trait are inherited in each sexually reproducing organism. So 2 copies of a trait are inherited, right? That means in this case, what were the trait? One trait was tallness and the other trait was dwarfness. So this means that both tallness and dwarfness are inherited in each of the offspring, but not both of them got expressed. So only one of them got expressed, whereas the other remained hidden. But that doesn't mean that only one is passed on or only one trait is inherited. That is why it is said 2 copies of a trait are inherited. That means whether it is which is the trait here? The trait here is height. So we are talking about height. So in this case, we have 2 parents, right? One is the tall plant, the other one is the short plant. So these are the 2 parents. And what is the trait that we have here? The trait which we are talking about here is height. So what are the 2 copies of height which are getting inherited here? So 1 copy of height from tall plant, 1 copy of height from the dwarf plant. So what copy of height will come from the tall plant? Tallness. And what copy of height will come from the dwarf plant? Dwarfness. So that means 2 copies of one trait will be inherited in each sexually reproducing organism. So that means to the child. Let us suppose if this is the child, this child will get 1 copy from father, 1 copy from mother. So that means both the parents will contribute a copy of each and every trait to the offspring. So that was a major conclusion of this experiment.
I hope this video was useful. If you have a feedback to share, do let us know in the comment section. And if you really enjoyed the video, do not forget to share it with your friends as well. I will meet you all very soon with a new video, with a new topic. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.